Today, on Earth, every second 4.6 humans are born. If you calculate, that's about 140 million children born every year. Currently, more than 8 billion humans live on Earth. That's a lot. This means Earth's population should be nearing an explosion, but for every 4.6 births per second, 2 humans leave the world. That's about 60 million deaths annually. Adding and subtracting these numbers shows us that the population of Earth is growing. Approximately 80 million people are added to the population annually. Another interesting figure to know is that since the day Homo sapiens, or modern humans, set foot on Earth, about 108 billion humans have been born. This means that currently, about 7.5% of all humans in history are alive. Throughout history, there have been times when humanity faced mass killings and population declines. The deadliest of those periods began in 1939 and ended in 1945. You've guessed it, World War II, the deadliest period in human history. During these 6 years, more than 70 million humans were killed. Not just soldiers or the countries involved in the war. Ordinary people also died from hunger and misery. But eventually, this war ended with 2 extraordinary actions. Two atomic bombs dropped on Japan, which forced Japan to surrender and ended World War II. Now we get to the main topic. What is the main topic? Death caused by nuclear weapons. Fortunately, after these 2 atomic bombings, such attacks have not been repeated to this day. Even though these 2 bombs are now considered the weakest atomic bombs, their casualty numbers are still terrifying. 1/3 of the population of both Japanese cities died in the explosions. Hiroshima had about 100,000 casualties, and Nagasaki had about 65,000. The 165,000 people who died immediately in these attacks were the luckiest victims because they died quickly and didn't feel much. But thousands of others died in agony. They burned. Their skin melted. They were trapped under rubble, and eventually they suffered and died from deadly radiation. Over the years, even up to 10-20 years later, many people continued to die from various cancers. Some might argue that Japan deserved it because of what they did. But this video isn't about whether Japan was guilty or not. We're talking about the effects of nuclear attacks on a city, because these 2 cities are the only examples we have. Knowing that these 2 bombs are weaker than today's nuclear bombs, what's even more alarming is the comparison. The bomb dropped on Hiroshima destroyed everything within a 1.5 km radius. It's horrifying, a 1.5 km radius wiped out. A circle with a 3 km diameter flattened. But compared to modern bombs, it's like a child's toy. Today, we have hydrogen bombs that are over 1,000 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. Imagine a circle with a 20 km diameter turned into a scorched wasteland. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis between the US and the Soviet Union, the world was in grave danger. At any moment, the world could have been destroyed. These 2 superpowers, armed with thousands of hydrogen bombs, had each other in their crosshairs. It wasn't just the US targeting the Soviet Union or the Soviet Union targeting the US. All the allies of these nations were also in the crosshairs. For example, Western Europe was considered like the USSR had to be destroyed, and vice versa for Eastern Europe. The West even targeted China, while the Soviets targeted Japan, South Korea, and even Turkey. The point is that during the Cuban Missile Crisis, if even one bomb had been fired, the entire world would have been destroyed. At that time, most of the world's population was unaware of the catastrophic danger brewing, but experts deeply involved in the situation knew the threat we were facing. Their fear wasn't about 1, 2, or 3 bombs. They were worried about the world's annihilation. Because it was no longer 1945 when the US had only 2 bombs. By 1962, the US owned 27,000 hydrogen bombs. The experts who knew this and were aware of the targeting of these missiles were filled with absolute terror. In 1956, the US CIA prepared this map and gave it to the Pentagon. What does this map mean? Each of these dots represents a hydrogen bomb that the US would need to launch immediately in case of a Soviet attack. The US and the Soviet Union knew that if they acted weakly, they would lose the world to the other. So both sides were fully armed, ready to face each other. This map you see covers everything from East Germany onward. They wouldn't bomb Western Europe because it was under their control, but the Soviets likely had a reverse map. Unfortunately, a map like this from the Soviet side hasn't been revealed. This one was declassified by the CIA years later in 2015, but the Soviets have disclosed nothing to date. However, we're certain they had all the major Western cities targeted, ready for orders to launch. Now, let's imagine we're in another world, looking at Earth. It's 1962, and these 2 superpowers go to nuclear war. We don't know how many bombs would be used at once, but experts from that time predicted that in the first 3 weeks of these attacks, at least 500 million people would die. In the first 3 weeks of these attacks, at least 500 million people from the Earth's population will be lost, equivalent to 10 World War E's in just 3 weeks. Now, let's say the fighting lasts 3 weeks. The bombs are exhausted. What happens next? What state is Earth in? During that time, the dust and pollution from these bombs would be so immense that a layer would form in the atmosphere, similar to the effects of multiple massive volcanic eruptions, ending ash and smoke skyward. This phenomenon is called a nuclear holocaust, or nuclear winter in some writings. As a result, Earth would rapidly cool, and greater problems would arise one after another. For instance, agriculture would cease. Most plants on Earth would head toward destruction and drying out. Meanwhile, radioactive radiation would be everywhere. Humans who are still alive would be exposed to this radiation, and as their bodies deteriorate, they would also face hunger and thirst. Time wouldn't even allow them to die from radiation-induced cancers. Hunger would kill them much faster. We can't guess how many billions of humans would be killed, or whether humanity would go extinct or survive. Experts say the human population would shrink dramatically, but extinction wouldn't occur. Eventually, humans would find ways to adapt and resist. Another group of survivors would include those responsible for firing these bombs. They would remain in shelters and safe places. We said we're viewing this scene from another world, but this scene hasn't happened in our world yet. Since the Soviet Union's collapse, fortunately, the number of nuclear bombs has decreased day by day. However, even now, Russia with 7,000 nuclear bombs and the US with a similar number stand against each other. 7 other countries also possess nuclear bombs, but not in large numbers. For example, France has the most among them, 300 bombs. China follows with 260 bombs. Then the UK with 215, Pakistan with 120, India with 115, Israel with 80, and North Korea with 7. Currently, the likelihood of using hydrogen and atomic bombs is very low, but it's not zero. And there's always a chance that a madman might decide to plunge the world into chaos. One interesting thing about these atomic bombs is that they act as deterrents. Unlike before World War II, nations are more cautious about going to war. Because of nuclear weapons, they think about consequences. That's why people say nuclear weapons have made the world safer. Countries, to avoid nuclear war, try not to fight and solve problems through negotiation. Many believe that if the US and the Soviet Union hadn't acquired nuclear weapons, they would have fought dozens of wars by now, possibly even wiping each other out. Of course, these two countries have fought each other elsewhere indirectly. For example, in the Korean War or the Vietnam War, these two superpowers were effectively opposing each other. While nuclear weapons have prevented large wars, smaller wars have continued and still do. So we can't say with certainty that atomic bombs bring peace. A notable quote worth mentioning is from Nikita Khrushchev, Stalin's successor during the Cuban Missile Crisis: "The living will envy the dead." This means that a conflict between these superpowers would create conditions where the living would wish they were dead.